Welcome to the channel, everyone. My name is Nick. For those that are new to the channel, hopefully by the end of this video, you do become a subscriber. So we have been talking about, banks potentially using XRP or banks using XRP for years, right? And a lot of people have questions because the number one thing that everyone has been asking is, if all of these banks are using XRP or if all of these partnerships are happening around these banks, using XRP, why isn't there any official major price action moves? Why isn't these, significant partnerships being told to us by the big banks like Bank of America or JP Morgan, etc.? Well, in this video, not only will that be answered, but we also have a few other things that I really want to address, which is the growing demand around ISO 20022, around the big banks using crypto, DLT, even, starting to tokenize specific things as well. All of that is going to be addressed. But first, I want to start off with the big bank problem, right? Which is the, idea that all these big banks are already tapped in. So here we have from all things XRP, and we have why banks won't announce Ripple partnerships yet. I saw this post, and I have to admit, initially, I thought this is probably going to be, clickbait or just, all hype. But after I read it, I was like, this is actually very well written and it makes a lot of sense. And I do think that it actually answers a lot of those questions that you have. Number one, Ripple's legal fight is ending, but banks stay silent. Why? Regulatory risk. Until the SEC case is fully closed, compliance concerns hold them back. Let's break down why they're waiting. Number one, the SEC's XRP lawsuit created a legal gray area. Since 2020, the SEC argued that Ripple's XRP sales violated securities laws. Until the case was resolved, XRP's legal status was in question. Banks could not risk engaging in potentially illegal securities transactions. Even though a court ruled that XRP is not a security in secondary markets, institutional sales were deemed securities, a key legal nuance that banks must carefully navigate. Banks don't like uncertainty. No clarity equals no announcements. Regulators require banks to avoid legal exposure. U.S. banks are overseen by multiple regulators, including the OCC, the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency, which also did greenlight banks, the Federal Reserve, which also said that, hey, we're not holding banks back, the FDIC, which the FDIC recently also did just greenlight banks, the SEC, which, at this point, we don't actually have a green light from the SEC, but we know that they have been very pro-crypto, which I do assume that at some point in time, we will see that green light. And then the FinCEN, Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, we haven't heard much, from them regarding the big banks, but I also think that they're going to be in line with the rest in terms of like the OCC and the FDIC and the Fed. Each of these agencies have strict rules for new activities and fintech partnerships. If a bank engages with an entity under legal scrutiny like Ripple, regulators demand a full risk analysis before approval. Until the Ripple lawsuit is completely over, banks can't confidently clear these regulatory hurdles. The OCC rules crypto partnerships require special approval. In 2021, the OCC restricted banks from engaging in crypto-related activities without first obtaining written approval. Even though the SEC eased the rule in March of this year, banks are still required to demonstrate robust risk management, compliance with all financial laws, zero exposure to legal violations. If a bank jumps the gun on Ripple before full regulatory clarity, it could face severe penalties. AML and FinCEN oversight, XRP's compliance risk. So the Bank Secrecy Act, the BSA, and the AML regulations require banks to prevent money laundering. In 2015, FinCEN fined Ripple $700,000 for BSA violations because it failed to register as a money services business and lacked proper AML controls. Banks must ensure Ripple is fully compliant with AML laws before engaging in large-scale partnerships. One misstep and the bank could be fined, investigated, or even lose its charter. Third-party risk management. Banks must vet Ripple thoroughly. Banks are extremely cautious when partnering with fintech firms. They must conduct in-depth due diligence on Ripple's compliance history, ensure no legal liabilities, which is hard when a firm is under SEC litigation, prove to regulators that XRP transactions won't be considered securities offerings. Until every legal risk is resolved, banks will wait before announcing partnerships. Regulatory reputation risk. No bank wants to be first. Imagine the headlines. Major U.S. bank faces SEC scrutiny for partnering with Ripple. Banks value stability over innovation. No bank wants to be the SEC's next target. Even after Ripple's legal victory, banks will move gradually, testing RippleNet without publicly committing to XRP use. So when will banks announce Ripple partnerships? Once the SEC officially closes the case and regulatory clarity is achieved, when banks receive explicit approval from the OCC, Fed, and the FDIC, when Ripple's compliance controls satisfy AML and securities laws. Right now, banks are engaged in private discussions with Ripple. Once they, are sure that regulators won't object, announcements will follow. Expect a slow rollout, not an overnight flood. Final takeaway, banks don't fear Ripple's technology, they fear regulatory backlash. And this is 100% facts. We've been really kind of focused on the regulatory side of things for a while because it is true. It's crucial for all of this to actually happen. They are waiting for ironclad legal clarity before announcing any partnerships involving RippleNet or XRP. The SEC case created uncertainty. Banks don't move until risk equals zero. Now that Ripple's legal battle is ending, banks will cautiously re-engage. Expect private pilots before public announcements. Regulation dictates the timeline, and in banking, compliance is king. Now, on top of all of this, okay, another step of this, which I know that you guys are going to say, this sounds like we have to wait for a very long time. I don't believe so. When we think about regulations and we think about regulatory clarity around the space, it's being accelerated by, this admin. I would argue that we should have regulatory clarity within the next 12 months. And I say that confidently because of the guidelines that have been, put out from big players like the FSB with the BIS, the G20. These are very large players, right? So they've kind of given us a timeline to follow, and the guidance that, they are promoting around this space. It feels as if the next 12 months are the big key to really kind of watch for things to not only unfold in a big way, but also those obstacles to be removed for the big banks to actually not only announce, but also tap in and utilize digital assets. Now, on top of that, we also think about ISO 20022. Big shout out to Anderson for this. We have, here's a big breadcrumb from former Ripple employee Bob Way regarding ISO 20022. If there's someone you should listen to, it's probably him. According to him, the ISO 20022 migration for cross-border payments is extremely helpful for Ripple's bank sales. I mean, can't you see how the stars are aligning? Soon, all Swift-enabled banks will have migrated to ISO 20022, and it will be then extremely easy to integrate RippleNet, even if that's not perhaps an official term anymore, by fully migrating in November of 2025, unless delayed. At the same time, we are seeing the Ripple versus SEC lawsuit fully wrapping up, with Ripple having full clarity regarding XRP. Then we'll likely get both a stablecoin and crypto market bill passed in a few months in the US. Banks can now custody crypto in the US as well, which will be extremely helpful for Ripple custody. It's amazing to witness all of this at once. And yes, this is something that I have been really kind of vocal about on this channel. We are starting to see everything fall into place. I get it. You guys are frustrated. We're annoyed. We want to retire. We want to have financial freedom, but it doesn't happen overnight, and it's not an easy thing to achieve. You got to remember that these are still investments at the end of the day. They're not a lottery ticket, just waiting for us to cash in. When we think about what's actually happening here, these are all key pieces to the puzzle. ISO 20022 got announced back in 2004. It's now being adopted, in 2025. These things take time. But this is Bob Way, and we have the reason this 2022 transition is extremely helpful to Ripple's bank sales team is this means that every bank is required to implement new technology. Banks hate to change an already working process. Change can introduce new problems, which means bankers get fired. Now, on top of that, we have this is the number one reason most bank integrations don't happen. New system development is expensive and risky. Mistakes can generate bank losses or fines. Bankers get fired. The person you are negotiating with must have product budget, development budget, risk appetite. And the best part about this is that RippleNet, or Ripple Payments in this case, is actually API plug and play. So you don't actually have to upgrade anything. You don't have to change anything. So this development that's expensive and risky, all of that gets thrown out. You don't have to even worry about it anymore. But on top of that, we have, with a mandatory 2022 change happening, the person you are negotiating with only needs to have a product budget. Money for development has already been allocated elsewhere. Nobody gets fired for following a mandate. That makes the sale a much easier lift for Ripple. That being said, bank software sales is still a hard process, especially with the SEC suit still adding FUD to the process. But even if banks wait for a settlement, their 2022 upgraded system becomes much easier for Ripple to integrate with them. Now, yeah, I think that this is a big, piece of the overall puzzle. I think that with regulations and ISO 20022 aligning, I think that this is going to be the big, thing that we've been waiting for so long, right? And this is converging at a very, crucial point around this space. Why? Well, because the Ripple case is wrapping up. We are about to see full regulatory clarity for XRP. At the same exact time that we have a pro-crypto admin, a pro-crypto Congress, the SEC has now flipped completely pro-crypto as well. All of the big regulatory bodies, the FDIC, we also think about the CFTC, for an example, the FinCEN, the OCC, all of these big players are now flipping on crypto in a very positive way. And we have about 12 months for all of this to really kind of get tapped in a big way. November 2025, unless it gets delayed, is where we do start to see the full migration to ISO 20022 happening. This is why I'm trying to tell you guys that we have such a huge opportunity in front of us. We can't get shaken out now. And we can't get, we can't lose focus on the big target here. But on top of this, right, we think about Swift. Because yeah, Swift has already said that, they're going to be enabling all of their banks to migrate to ISO 20022, which, we're talking about 11,000 plus institutions, right? These are big bank players. But on top of that, Swift also did put this out back in December, which was, is your institution ready to make the leap to ISO 20022? JP Morgan Payments has shared invaluable insights into their successful adoption. They revealed how early preparation and a clear strategy can future-proof your payments ecosystem. And we actually have here the ISO 20022 migration is key. On top of that, to future-proofing the payments ecosystem and unlocking the full potential of enriched data. Now, on top of that, we also had a post back in December with BNY Mellon. They put client experience at the heart of its ISO 20022 strategy. Check this out.
So the overall strategy for the bank is client-centric. We want to provide our clients with the best available service that we can provide for payments. From a payment strategy perspective, we looked at ISO as an opportunity to provide us with a couple of different levers for enriching our client experience. So the first is our clients heard about ISO, or maybe they didn't hear about ISO, but we have the opportunity to educate them about ISO. But not only educate them, we can create tools and services that help them to enable ISO. Then we get the efficiency of using ISO, and they do too. That knock-on effect of getting that efficiency benefit that we have with ISO. That was part of our strategy. Build services and tools around ISO to help our clients enable them to use ISO. The second part of it is related to risk and control, because we're a bank. So most of what we do is we worry about risk. We really only have two core competencies as a bank. The first is trust, the second is network. And that first one, in order for us to do that effectively, we need to have good controls in place over our risk. ISO helps us do that. It provides us with much deeper knowledge about the underlying payment information that then we can use for our financial crimes compliance, our sanction tools for all our AML and KYC. By making ourselves more in control and have a better, tighter risk control, that enables us to make our clients happier with us and get more clients.
So yeah, listen, we have been hearing from these big banks on how crucial ISO 20022 actually is, and they want to have these big benefits hit their, clients in a huge way, so that the experience for the clients is extremely efficient. Everything is a lot faster, when we think about the change here, the main thing that we have been talking about for years, and it kind of sounds like I'm a broken record, right, is faster settlement times, cheaper settlement as well, right? When we're making payments or receiving, payments, the fees are a lot cheaper. Everything's a lot more transparent. It's just an overall better experience. That's what we've been hearing from these big banks, whether it be BNY, Morgan, it could be Bank of America. It does not matter, right? It's the main focus. But on top of that, one thing that we keep hearing from Swift, and this goes even back to January of this year, which is the emergence of digital assets has the potential to create new, innovative, and effective ways of trading securities. But despite the promise, the tokenization landscape remains fragmented, limiting its scalability and broad adoption. Our latest paper sets out 5 key areas that need to be tackled to forge a robust digital asset ecosystem. Now, again, interoperability is the key thing. How can we bridge TradFi to DeFi? How can we build a bridge between, these two worlds, essentially? Now, I know for a fact, because of the research that we have done on this channel, that Ripple employees like Marcus Inventor, for an example, and even David Schwartz have stated that they want to tap into the institutional DeFi space in a big way. The reason why they're doing this is because of the fact that they already have big players like Axelar tapped in, which are solving interoperability problems to actually tie TradFi and Web2, essentially Web2 finance as a whole, into the Web3 world and DeFi. And we already know that they've been pushing institutional DeFi around the XRP ledger in a huge way. And they've also been very bullish on the idea of institutions, really kind of jumping on chain and tapping in to specific, DLTs like the XRP ledger. Now, the best way to do that is through offering key things like tokenization services. And also, this is why I've always stated when we look at like the clawback amendment and, things that this community completely, hated on. For example, the clawback amendment was always stated as, oh, look at now they're going to be able to claw back your XRP and they're going to, scam you out of your XRP. Like, it's all nonsense, right? When you actually think about the clawback amendment, that is a regulatory obstacle that needs to be in place for the big institutions and the big banks to actually tap into the network. It's the number one reason why Franklin Templeton has been tokenizing millions and millions of dollars on the Stellar network, which is very beneficial and bullish for XLM. The same goes for XRP, right? To have that, clawback amendment there, that's a green light for banks. They already have the regulatory, factors in place that need to actually experience that institutional adoption and the use of the ledger around DeFi use cases, tokenization use cases. But also we have to think about it like this, right? Ripple has everything all under one umbrella for the big banks actually when they are ready to tap in. And I've stated for years, by the way, that ISO 20022 is actually going to be an accelerant for the big banks to actually look into the public blockchains and start to adopt them through names like Ripple. Because again, they're already here. They've been here. They've been building for well over a decade. They have been working with institutions and the big banks for a very long time. So why wouldn't, as a bank, why wouldn't you tap in to one of the best in class players in this space that has so much experience, that's been tested? The technology there, has been tested for years and years and years. You see that it can handle scale. You can see what it can handle. Why wouldn't these big banks look into Ripple, look into XRP? But also, this is what I've been stating for a very long time, since going all the way back to even 2022, because this was back when ISO 22 was being discussed about CBDCs and, what it means for Swift. I said it doesn't matter if ISO pertains to specific tokens like XRP or not, because again, a lot of people have been stating like, oh, XRP is ISO compliant. The main thing is that Ripple's ISO compliant, which is the first company to ever be ISO compliant and be on the ISO list as a blockchain-based company. But I said, in my opinion, ISO 20022 will open the door for digitization to be realized across the entire financial sector's landscape, because it will. This is a door. This is a big door that's opening. And when this opens, when we go back to that post from Anderson, this is a previous Ripple employee, Bob Way, telling us that it's required for every single bank to implement new technology. ISO 20022 is the enabler here. It is going to unlock so much innovation. And the innovation has already been force-fed to us by the biggest players like Swift, like BlackRock, for an example, that continue to tell us tokenization is the future. Tokenization of every single asset is going to happen. And guess what you're going to also see from that? You're going to see liquidity pools. You're going to see lending pools. You're going to see, people borrowing against tokenized assets. You're going to see a completely different financial world unlocked and living on chain, because it's not just about bringing on, for example, real estate, which is a $379 trillion global asset class. No, it's how can we scale that from $379 trillion to $800 trillion? Well, all of a sudden, tokenization allows for anyone to actually get a piece of the real estate market. You no longer need to have $30,000 or $50,000. You could just invest $1,000 or $3,000 and get a percentage, because now you have, these massive apartment buildings and apartment complexes that are now fractionalized through tokenization. This is why I keep saying that you need to focus up. You need to realize that this is a much bigger, deal than you ever thought, in the past. A lot of you have always said all the money will live on chain. All the money is going to go through XRP. All the money this, all the money that, or Swift's 11,000 banks are going to tap into XRP. What if I told you that it's not just about the big banks, but it's actually about all of the money out there in the world moving on chain, but also completely new asset classes being unlocked and multiples, right? In terms of like the multipliers of the value behind those asset classes also becoming a reality. It all happens with tokenization. It all happens with, the stars aligning. And the stars here that we're talking about aligning is, regulations, number one. Number two, standards in place like ISO 222. Number three is the adoption from the big players. And it's not just going to be happening around XRP. You're going to see HBAR being adopted. You're going to see XLM being adopted. But once you start to see that adoption happen, then we look at the number 4 step, which is probably one of the biggest ones: utilization at scale. This is all becoming a reality through these major innovations and through the push on legislation with, of course, the idea of regulations happening around specific assets like XRP through cases like the, Ripple and SEC lawsuit. I think that lawsuit was a blessing in disguise, because it allowed XRP to be a front runner around achieving, clarity. And I do believe that XRP will have full regulatory clarity by the end of this year, which is going to be a game changer. And I do think that we're going to start to see some pretty big announcements happening this year because of that case wrapping up. But with that being said, I hope that you guys enjoyed this video. If you guys definitely leave a like, subscribe, to notifications on because more free content. You guys are more than welcome to follow me on Twitter and join the free Discord in the description below. And with that being said, guys, it's been Nick. Thanks for watching. Peace out.